think it's time for you to have your lysergic acid. Drink this down and...
Hello everyone, welcome back to Rec Room Radio. With me today, I have two special guests, and I could easily say close friends that I've been enjoying their company for a while now. With me, I have John 1135 and Nokoo TV. John, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm John 1135, or on Twitter handle is XI35. One of the names I go is by John Edakrvsen. And I host spaces on Twitter to just simply discuss things like philosophy and whatever is on our heads, or just hang out. And mostly I do them with my friend here, Nokoo. And we also do readings on books. One of the current readings that we're doing right now is on the Orgins by Plato. Hopefully we'll be done by it maybe in about a month. We always do them every Friday now. But yeah, that's who I am.
Thank you, John. And Nokoo, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My Twitter handle is Nokoo TV. I've been blessed with being able to befriend Sola and John here, and I too am active on Twitter Spaces, and I do readings with John, and then just interact with people that I come across. Some of whom share my faith as a Catholic, other people don't, but I always just try to learn from others, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah, and I'm glad I was able to get you guys on this episode, because I could comfortably say you two are some of the leading people, especially online, for our circles that are there for advice, and not only in like philosophy but other concepts of the one holy church. And that's something that I just want to say I feel like gets underappreciated a lot. So from me personally, thank you guys both for what you do. It means a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you.
Going on to questions, I'm assuming you guys weren't always as you are now. So what initially sparked your interest in philosophy, and how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah. Well, for me, it was, I guess it started off really with political philosophy or political theory. This was also like during the 2016 elections. And I got curious on, the more I got involved in like looking and talking about politics, the more it kind of just pushed me into looking more into political theory and political philosophy, just to understand more about like where am I coming from. And I was thinking about I am, I guess you could say, Republican, but primarily I'm a conservative at the time, like that. But what does it mean, like, to be conservative, or as it was said, like conservative values and all? What are the principles? And I most of this really for me was formed by my dad, who is pretty much the main influence in my life. He always taught me whatever, no matter what. And so I usually try just to emulate what my dad does, and especially when it comes to politics, just like any other person invested on that too. And yeah, that's where I started off. My dad gave me like a basis for it, a formation for it. And he always directed me to, just stay in your lane, in a sense, to say that don't just listen to whatever, don't just read whatever. He was very encouraging in me sort of pursuing this more, and also just reading the same people, people that are not necessarily always like thought as political philosophers, so like G.K. Chesterton, for example, and like went in on C.S. Lewis and all. Part of the reason why I kind of went from political philosophy or political theory in that regard to kind of more theology. I see it there, you're holding Mere Christianity. Yeah, nice. Need to reread that. So at some point in my life, I kind of went from investment from political philosophy to actually like more like on theology. And I think this was probably at the year maybe 2018, because at this point, well, a couple of things happened to me. Well, I moved to the United States. I was originally from living in Puerto Rico, and I got a job offer in my around the South, just people like that. and when I moved into Louisiana, actually, I was pretty much by myself, and all the people that I kind of interacted with were like from Discord, and I got more acquainted with like more religious and political, sort of political and religious sort of servers around. That was mostly the people I was talking to. So I was talking to people about politics, but at the same time, I was also getting to talk about like religion. And as someone from a Protestant background, I also got acquainted with people who were more like Catholics and others, mostly Catholics actually. And this was I think it was because of the YouTuber Dave the Distributus, where I joined his server. At the time it was called Clear Trats. And yeah, just try to talk to more about people. I was talking more about like those things, church, something, sometimes about like theology, or rather not theology, but just apologetics really. And from apologetics there there was like the talk about existence of God and other things there. Yeah. Anyway, so just to kind of bring it back here, so it came to the point where I was like invested in some things about politics and political philosophy, political theory, and all that. Not to get them too much mixed up here, because for me, like the latter it was more like it was kind of more like a sociological study about like why people are like this, why people why people in politics act like this or hold these positions and all that. And then there was like political philosophy, which is more just kind of like understanding the nature of like these principles and so on that people hold. And yeah, anyway, and I was more associated with that sort of things on right-wing politics, especially those like that were considered to be a bit heterodox for like the common sort of sort of people in the political scene, I guess you can say. I wasn't that invested, but I was like invested in things like the whole like neo-reactionary sort of stuff, particularly Moblog. I was reading like his blog posts around also this time too. But anyway, as I was getting invested with that, I was also getting invested with things that had to do with religion. Because I didn't want to like leave that. It kind of dawned on me during this time when I moved into Louisiana, and my dad confronted me about this. I was kind of not, just taking care of that. So as I was kind of trying to, I guess you can say, just figure those things out again. Because at that point, I remember that I wasn't even going to church that much that time. Yeah, that was one of the things that my dad confronted me that he was concerned about. So. I started to join more like the sort of the religion Discord servers stuff there, and I also got more involved in like some ministry, campus ministry, then the college that I transferred to over there as I transferred for a job there too. So yeah, that kind of how it went. That trajectory went like that. It was a concern of like that I was just not doing well. I was never really like an atheist and all that, but I wasn't necessarily the most well-practiced Christian, even though I used to be like very involved in church stuff because my parents both were both involved, and they got me and my brothers and sisters also involved in ways that we also very enjoyed. It was formed the background of us and all. But anyway, at this point in my life, I was just not as involved as I used to be. So as I'm kind of like exploring things in philosophy and all that, I was also trying to change things in my attitude, in the way that I would approach religion too. And very, very primarily Christianity. How was I approaching these things? So, and this kind of, with my interactions with Catholics and all that, obviously there's like a lot of like debate there and all that, but I was just more concerned about, just trying to, hey, I need to do things better. I need to get involved more. So as I moved, joined the campus ministry and all that, I was still, dealing with all this stuff at the same time. So there was like, philosophy, there was like those Christianity, how I was doing all these things. Anyway, yeah, and I guess around maybe 2019, that's where it came to me. Just to skip a bit of some stuff here, like for me, it like that's where I started to more about like Catholicism seriously as for what it is, because a lot of like I realized that I had a lot of misconceptions about it, and I also tried to sort of understand it better, and that's where it came for me as a call to kind of like explore it more and more and all. But it wasn't until sometime I think it was actually late 2019 where I did make the decision to kind of like go to I did actually make the decision to go to the local RCIA there. But then COVID hit in 2020 and I wasn't able to participate there, but it was not until like 2022 where I just found a local parish when I moved here in Georgia, try to join, be more, just learn more about Catholicism as I did that. Anyway, yeah, that's kind of for me how things went in a very sort of overall view. Yeah.
Thank you, John. And definitely sounds like almost a butterfly effect, or one small thing happens and it just spreads into a giant almost wave of all these other events coming together. Glad to see you are where you are today, and I can't wait to see you grow more. And for you, Nokoo, same question.
Yeah, well, a lot of my journey in philosophy begins in personal experience. Prior to getting into philosophy, I lived a blessed life. Thank God. But the blessings of life were somewhat bittersweet because I did not understand the reason behind them. I enjoyed them, but they seemed meaningless by and large. I knew that I loved helping people develop. I was involved in a project that involved helping talented people from around the world develop their skills, and that was a great blessing, seeing someone with potential, with ability, realize that potential and go on to accomplish great things, and that gave me a lot of joy. But again, I didn't understand the reason behind things, so ultimately it kind of seemed meaningless. Even though it was enjoyable, it was without a purpose. And at this time, as an American, also experiencing life as an American, and the discourse between Americans, which at that time was very economic. This is before things became more social. So a lot of the economic discourse in America, among Americans, was between capitalism and socialism. And at that time, before getting into these economic debates, again, related to what I was saying about my blessed life, I was very worldly. I didn't think about religion at all. I was the kind of person that would respond to the question, are you religious or whatever, with I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I cared a lot. Well, I appreciated Christianity, for example, and Christ, but not to the point of joining any religion. It was more so a kind of spirituality that was a mixed bag of a bunch of different things. And then, so like I was saying, so that was me at the time, spiritual, not religious, getting involved in economic debates. And early on, listening to both sides, both the capitalists and the socialists, the side that made sense to me more were the capitalists. They seemed to have better arguments. And included in these people that were making a case for capitalism were a school of economics. It's called the Austrian school. And I found out about them, and I would, one in particular, his name is Ludwig von Mises. He seemed to be one of the greater economists in that tradition. And there is an institute that is devoted to promoting his thought. And I would keep up with that institute. They would publish videos and articles, and I would read them. But I didn't think. I would mostly consume this kind of content. And that's why, as I read, as I started to kind of get more involved in this, I began to read more. And I read, for instance, Mises, he wrote a book on socialism in the 1920s. And that was a great book because he seemed to have refuted socialism in it. He kind of showed that if you have a planned economy, then you can't have economic calculation. And if you don't have economic calculation, then a bunch of bad things happen. So I was grateful to just learn from so many different Austrians. Included in that list is Ron Paul, Hans Hoppe, Murray Rothbard. He in particular was very influential to me. He seemed to be one of the more honest Austrians, and he promoted anarcho-capitalism, which at the time made a lot of sense to me. But then as time went on, learning from this particular institute, the Mises Institute, and reading the books, I learned more and more. And that's when I came across a few interesting people, including in that list is Tom Woods, who is a Catholic Austrian economist. And he wrote a book called How the Catholic Church Built Western Civilization. And he was kind of going into what the Catholic Church did in Europe. And I was amazed learning all that. And around that time, I also learned about a philosopher named Edward Feser, because he seemed to be Austrian in a way. And he was a step up from what I was used to, because he was a formal philosopher compared to others, which were economists and that kind of thing. So Edward Feser wrote on this very important principle for libertarians, the self-ownership principle. And that was my first introduction to higher level philosophy, is learning from Feser. And he kind of showed some problems with the self-ownership principle, which is very important among the more philosophical libertarians like Hans Hoppe. And so that's when I began to grow skeptical of libertarianism, and then I also discovered through the Mises Institute another economist. His name was Jesus Huerta de Soto, and he did a bit of work on it's called the School of Salamanca, which was a Catholic institution that made a lot of discoveries centuries before the main economists like Adam Smith. And then also, if you're an Austrian, Karl Menger and Eugene Bonne-Vaverk. So all these things came together, discovering Feser, discovering Woods, discovering Jesus Huerta de Soto. And at that point, I was skeptical of libertarianism, because there seemed to be some shortcomings with it. A lot of the shortcomings seemed to be moral in nature. So there were these questions about morality that I couldn't answer as a libertarian. And so you have all these also Catholic Austrians, which finally led me to look into the Catholic Church and take it a little bit more seriously, because they seem to, in the case of the School of Salamanca, they were economists, but they also answered or seemed to answer the moral questions. At around this time, there was a tragedy in France where a church, Notre Dame Cathedral, was burned, and I remember witnessing that and thinking to myself, why would anybody do that? It's a church; they don't hurt anybody. Such a bad thing to do. But what moved me was the response by Catholics, which is a very solemn response to their church burning. They would pray, and that moved me. And at that point, I was drawn closer to the Catholic faith, and then that's when I made my first steps into higher level philosophy with a philosopher called Garrigou-Lagrange. Garrigou-Lagrange is a 20th century Catholic philosopher, and I remember reading his books and taking forever getting through them. So it took me about 2 months to get through 2 pages of one of his books. But that was very good practice when it comes to philosophy. And so since then, I pursued the faith, and I kind of left economics to the side and just came to appreciate what the church had to offer, and ever since then, I joined Twitter, and at first I would talk with people about economics, but then it became about my faith, and through Twitter I've been able to meet many beautiful people, two of which I'm speaking to right now, and fast forward a bit, I met John, and we started to host Twitter Spaces where we would read whatever we wanted to. And over time, this was inspired by other people that were doing it. We weren't the first to do it. There were other people, very smart people, that did that. But we followed in their footsteps. And ever since then, I've come to just get to know a bunch of people, Sola and John being some of them, and have had the privilege to learn from them. And that's kind of been my journey from this life in America as this kind of new agey, nihilistic person to a Catholic.
Thank you. And something I know is similar in both of you guys is that you started in like political economic theory, and not even for just you two, but like a lot of people I meet in general who are recent converts to the church, is that they almost find a sense of wanting more, or like finding a higher purpose, like thinking to yourself, like, is this it? Like, are humans just, you know, here to bicker about property rights or like these legalistic concepts, when the church provides far more than that? It gives you an actual purpose. It says there's more to life than just this. And then that's something I find very fascinating and beautiful, how it's almost like we joke around a lot that it's like the libertarian to Catholic pipeline for people who get really into it. But going on to the next question I want to ask you guys, could either of you share a philosophical idea or concept that was very profoundly influenced in your thinking? Like, what was it? A piece of literature or a work, or was it like, you know, a treatise or an essay that made you think like, wow, like this is what made me, you know, this is what sold it to me, this is what got me to take my leap of faith and like get into this? What do you think, John?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about that one, because you know, I think for me, the text that I always come back to is Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton, which I read it as more as an apologetic sort of text, but it goes more really there, because you're seeing Chesterton explaining, you know, Christianity. He is not necessarily being theological on occasions, but he is, however, you know, speaking to how, you know, so far gone, you know, man has, you know, went into the deep end of like denying the most basic things and affirming the most insane things in his time. And yeah, I really like the text and the way that he is kind of a bit of a mystical thinker in some ways, because he has a lot of appreciation towards like fairy tales, and that sort of put things for me in a very different light there. And yeah, so I would say like Orthodoxy is one of those texts that really did have an impact. It's one of those my dad's favorite texts too. That's how I found out about it. My brother was the one that kind of like gave me a link to look for it and all. But yeah, it's it is Chesterton's like works are always interesting. The way that he says very simple things sometimes, but he makes it look big. But like I guess the idea, you know, he comes in to talk about, you know, it's Christianity is you know, like something. It has paradoxes, there's mystery in it, but all these things come to illuminate. So it's yeah, that's I would say that it's not, like I said, it's not like this sort of I guess you can say very complex philosophical theme and all that, but it is one that it does look very impacted me in the way that I approach things, in the way that I kind of like also was approaching my faith too at the time. But yeah.
Thank you for that, John. And what about for you, Nokoo?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, as there's an ambulance in the background. But it's an interesting question, and I don't know if it's a concept, but the Eucharist has changed my life. So, like, I was talking about my reversion to the faith, because I was baptized Catholic, but I was worldly for most of my life. When I began to revert to the faith, I discovered the Eucharist. And the reason why the Eucharist was significant was because I always sought to get to the root of things. It's always been attractive to go beyond the surface, not concern myself with what most people are doing, but try to go deeper than the superficial. And in the Eucharist, I discovered the deepest truth that there is, which raises a lot of questions. And then, but it has, ever since I have rediscovered it, let's say, it has changed my life, and what I do and what I think is related to that. So when seeking answers to many questions, the main question I have in the back of my head is, how does it relate to the Eucharist? The Eucharist being the heart of God, which the Second Vatican Council tells us is the source and the summit of the Christian life. So that has truly changed my life, but I'm skeptical of it being a concept because of how personal it seems to be, and so that would be it right there.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you that later down the road, comparing classical thought to modernist, and why you have a pet peeve for things like concept and worldview in regards to people using it for framing Christianity. But until then, my next question would be along the lines where I actually got to ask this a lot for people who wonder why I'm interested, or people like us are interested in philosophy and theology. They would say, how do you approach a balance between abstract philosophical thinking and its practical implications of everyday life? So more of the question, when do you guys know, like, hey, this is very far out theory, to I could apply this in everyday life? And you want to go first on that, John?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm not necessarily like a philosopher by discipline, but I try to do what I can as a layman, and try to get proper habits when it comes to.
Well, if I may reframe the question, then what use does philosophy have to the layman, people like us?
Yeah, well, discourse, being able to explore, the things, ideas that we hold, being able to explore ourselves, and sort of be able to have a dialogue on things with respect to those things that pertain to the good, which is not really one of those things I always kind of like talk about very explicitly, but it does come back to that, and of course, I usually, what I try to do is like avoid getting too invested in jargon, because that's something that happens to me a couple of times, depending on the subject, that it gets very difficult to communicate things that are supposed to be like impact someone, and of course so I try to see like if I have an idea, I find it interesting, all that, one of the things I try to do as a part of my practice is can I be able to explain it back to someone, whether or not they are initiated. Let's say they are initiated in the same stuff that I've looked into or thought about this before, or haven't read the same text, some of those things. Can I be able to sort of bring it back to them, explain them to them? Because if I can sort of go through those barriers, then in a sense I've proven to myself that I understand what I kind of thought to by myself. But that's why I never tried to just simply read stuff by myself right now and all. That's why I have Nokoo here to kind of like be able to read something and see what if we can communicate it, and then also be able to extend this sort of circle to other people. That's why we do it in Twitter Spaces, so that people can come in and talk about things. Sometimes you have very learned people, or people also like asking questions to us. Sometimes these questions are a bit thought-provoking to us too, so that's also a good thing to kind of like keep on not just simply just this you could say circle jerk for lack of a better way of putting it and all. Anyway, so I always try to see the relevance of it. Well, one way that I try to do is just to see if can I be able to explain it to myself as before I was able to understand it all, or explain it to others who are not initiated, and see how that is, because I know that these things may seem sort of abstract, especially the current topics that Nokoo and I speak about, but they do pertain to the whole enterprise of philosophy. I do believe that if you don't have like this, I think that you're going to probably have a bad time in the long run, as to you can get very invested. So we talk about like common sense, and of course when we use this term common sense, we're using it in the more sort of like the way that Thomists and Aristotelians would use this term, kind of more that on par with like intuition or so. And we always, our focus is on this because there is a sense that like a lot of the sort of criticisms of philosophy being too abstract is because of the way that it doesn't ground itself on the first truths, and those first truths are, is what me and Nokoo are trying to, talk about, trying to figure out how do we are able to explain this to others, and also, yeah, like I said, see if it helps others too on that, because ultimately we don't see that like philosophy is not just simply some academic enterprise. Everybody's going to live it out in some way. People are going to talk about things. You and your friends, if you go to wherever, you're always going to talk about something that's not just simply about the time of the day or so and all. You're going to talk about things that pertain to your friendship, things that pertain to like you're seeking out advice on something like and things that and discernment on whatever it is. It could be like religion, it could be very important decisions in your life in general, and so people want to seek wisdom on these things, and ultimately we do believe that philosophy is the love of wisdom, as it says so in the name. Yeah, anyway, I hope that's a bit clear on that point. I know that I have a habit to not be very coherent sometimes in the way that I say things, so yeah.
No, I think they answered it really well, and I'd say it's kind of funny, but for me, a lot of stuff goes back to me used to thinking philosophy is, like you said, it's just a circle jerk. It's for people using word salad, throwing around, seeing who can make the bigger book, who can make the more complex sentences. And then over time, I remember first being introduced to the dialogues of Plato in high school and going over Socrates and them discussing it's Socrates' irony, where he would ask people a question, he'll keep asking them until they realize like they do not know what they're talking about. And I thought to myself, like, okay, this is silly, but for a thought experiment I did it myself, where I'd ask myself a series of questions until I realized, like, wait, I'm getting to a circular definition here. I need to think about this more. And it was intriguing to me because I thought, what does it mean for man to be good? What does it mean for evil to exist? Like, what is evil? And a lot of that really got me intrigued in thinking, getting back more into theology, like what are these concepts here? What does the Bible say in a lot of this stuff? And that's something that really fascinated me. And I would say philosophy has definitely been a blessing and a curse, where it has provided a lot of clarity in some places, but also burned a hunger in my stomach to learn more and find more and keep exploring more at once. But Nokoo, what about you?
Yeah, similar to John. Someone who has been very influential to me is two people, and then another, it would be who John mentioned earlier, which is G.K. Chesterton, because the guy seemed to be very wise but very simple in his speech. So he has these insights that make you think, but he says them in a clear way, in a simple way. But then related to that is a personal hero of mine. His name is Peter Kreeft. He's a Catholic philosopher who's still alive today. And much like Chesterton, he has this gift of being able to explain complex things in a simple way. And this theme of being able to explain complex things in a simple way, that's one of the things that I love to do the most. So if I do read books, the goal in the end is to be able to explain them in a simple way, which makes me think about explain the word, what it means. It seems to mean to make clear, to make easy to see, but you can't make something easy to see if you can't see it easily yourself. So there's a very important aspect to explanation where you have to understand it. You have to be able to see it well in order to impart that vision, in order to teach people. So that's really been at the heart of what I try to do. And the third person, Chesterton, Kreeft, the third person is Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman is a 20th century American scientist. he worked on the atom bomb, and he has a technique. It's called the Feynman technique. And when I first discovered it a few years ago, I realized that up until then, I never knew how to learn. And so upon discovering his technique, that's when I first began how to learn. And it was around this time that, like I mentioned prior, I started to get into philosophy through Father Gary Lagrange. And so, like I said, it took me 2 months to get through 2 pages, but a lot of the struggle lied in taking what was complex in the book and being able to explain it in a simple way. And so that took a long time, 2 months for 2 pages. But like I said before, it was great practice, but it also inspired me. And that's what I try to do to this very day. Because like John mentioned about common sense, for example, when I speak to people today, they consider common sense to be abstract. They consider it to be relative to each person. So, but that's the problem, and that's what I've devoted myself to trying to explain. Because if humans can recognize common sense, then they have a common ground to live alongside each other that is rooted in truth. And so that's been a lot of my my mission, is exploring common sense, the first truths, and being able to explain them in a simple way, so that hopefully it inspires people to get more into philosophy. Not that they are not already philosophers, because that's why common sense is significant, because it shows us that humans are naturally philosophical. We recognize the first truths, but sometimes it's hard to come around to understanding that. And so that's what I devote a lot of my time to, is exploring the first truths and being able to explain them. But why though? Because, as I said prior, the Eucharist is at the heart of what I do. And there does seem to be a kind of natural communion among humans that occurs when they partake in dialogue. But honest dialogue, a dialogue where both people that are speaking to each other can agree on the truth, which seems to be happening less and less, partly because of ideology, speaking as a former libertarian. So I enjoy coming across different people and then finding that common ground and then being able to learn with them, instead of what I was more used to in the past as a libertarian, which was, I have the truth and you don't, and all you have to do is just believe what I say, which in the end is very harmful, not only to the person doing it, but to the society and to the nation. And so, yeah.
Thank you. And going on about philosophy, as we already know, it is a very diverse and large field of study. You have all kinds of different branches, from metaphysics to ethics to logic to political philosophy. The list goes on and on. But I want to know more about what you guys are mainly reading into, which is classical philosophy. And my question for you guys, and really for you viewers as well listening in, why should I read classical philosophy? Why not analytic or continental? What is it that makes classical philosophy unique or different from the others?
I would just bluntly say is because the ancients were right. So yeah, I do kind of like to say this provocatively. I say that, like Parmenides was right, Plato was right, Heraclitus was right, Thales was right, but they were right in certain respects. I really and part of why I'm saying it like that is because I'm also reacting towards the way that people, the common sort of notion of philosophy as like either a proto-science or this sort of like view of like the history of philosophy is just like, ideas succeeding other ideas and just bringing in the old, throwing out the new and all that, when it's not always that like that. It's the way that I see philosophy as in history is similar to how like it was presented by the Frederick Copleston's in his History of Philosophy. He sees it as a discourse throughout time, and it usually is the same things being passed down that people are engaging in, and those are so when looking into the ancients and all that, you look at Thales. He said that all is water. You look at then you look at the successors saying that it's air, and then you get to Heraclitus saying that it's fire. But this in saying this, what are they actually saying? And people tend to take it that as just maybe just merely a scientific hypothesis before you can even do quote unquote do science and all properly. And that's kind of that's where I said that's where it's a misconception of what the Greeks were doing. In a sense, they were doing science, but of course, science how it was traditionally understood, not necessarily because they just didn't had a correct perception of science. No, it's just that when it comes to them, Thales, let's go to Thales there, saying that all is water. What he is really saying is not that like this is my scientific hypothesis in the sort of modern sort of sense about it, and everything everything is solved or something like that. That's not necessarily what is going on there. He's saying all is water, but at the same time he's also saying that all has gods or all has souls too. And that gives you a better idea what this is sort of saying in a way there. But do you find what you find is a declaration of like what is this that all things have in common? What is it that is there? Because there seems to be that on the appearance of difference, on the appearance of change and all, nothing at all is kind of in a sense not staying like as one, but at the same time there is this sort of thing beyond like the experience in itself, where it kind of like there is something being shared and all that. So like I guess to say this, it's like what is that thing that is all things have in common? What is that common principle? This would be like the arche, and so when Thales is saying that all is water, what he said the arche is water, and that's to say that that is and this is like what I mean about it's not merely like just like a proto-scientific hypothesis or so and all that. Yes, it's scientific, but in the more traditional sense of that term. We're not merely talking about the physical sciences like that of what we see today with physics, chemistry, and the rest. But we are seeing that we're going from what it merely appears to what there is, and so yeah, that would be like the way that I say that like the Greeks had it right. The ancients overall had it right. And what you see from Thales onward is this consideration of the arche and all that. That's what you see with Heraclitus, and Heraclitus has more things to say than just simply saying that all is in flux. Too, he's also considering the same things that his predecessors were considering, and that's why you find things like, for example, his understanding of logos, of divine law. And so anyway, the ancient I guess you to kind of maybe put it all together, like the ancients had it right insofar as they understood that there was something beyond just merely what is appearance, what is beyond like this change. There is something that it kind of is one, you can say, and this something that stays, something that is immutable behind all that it seems like all that seems changing at all times. But anyway, and so a lot of philosophy comes from those considerations, and everything else, and then you get to the considerations of the good, and where does the good come from, and all those. So the ancients can bring us especially good answers on not just simply where to start to, where to go from, and and I think that a lot of like what we see nowadays with the breaking down of sort of like the way that academia is, and some of the things being brought up, I like the sort of the intellectual sort of degradation and all that. I think this will bring us back into vindicating the ancients, which some people have declared, especially with the understandings of physics and all that, with the bringing back of like Platonism or Aristotelianism. There are some trends like that. But anyway, yeah, I would just leave it like that.
It's interesting you mentioned academia because our next guest we're going to be having on is Robinson, specifically talking about academia and where it all went wrong. But a bit of a different question I wanted to pose to Nokoo. Say I'm, back to what we're saying, a layman, I say, Nokoo, I have no interest in philosophy because they were wrong. You know, not everything's made of water and all these things like that. He's like, I only have science. You know, why do I need philosophy when the science shows everything I need? What would your response be, in your humble opinion, to someone coming in abrasive like that to you?
Yeah, I would question what they're saying, which you said you cannot seem to answer with science. So I've come across people who care a lot about science, almost to a fault, and so my approach to them is often not even trying to make a case for philosophy, but more so asking them about their own science and how scientific they are in what they say. Because one of the ideologies that seems to be very common among people is that of scientism. But what I try to remind people that I come across that seem to promote this ideology is that ideology is not scientific. And so instead of trying to make a case for philosophy, in a philosophical way, I question them about their science, and then with the hope that they would become more scientific, and in becoming more scientific, becoming more open to philosophy, which is the foundation of science. But it's easy to kind of lose sight of that because we're so familiar with science and we think that it can answer every question. But that's what I would ask a question about. Can science answer every question? And the answer seems to be no. But that doesn't mean that science is unimportant, that we shouldn't bother with it, but more so that it has its place among other ways of coming to know and love God.
Thank you, Nokoo. And going on earlier, I know I asked about the many different schools of thought and philosophy. For both of you individually, what would you say is a school of philosophy that you most strongly disagree with, and why? Either of you, if you want to take that, John or Nokoo. Let's go, John.
I'll let Nokoo go first because I think he has a better way of bringing it about.
All right, let's hear it, Nokoo.
Yeah, so what school of philosophy do I disagree with the most? It's a good question because on the one hand, I'm thinking of schools of philosophy. On the other hand, I'm thinking of ideologies, and they seem to be distinct. So, but if I had to pick a school, it would be something like nominalism, because an American philosopher, Charles Sanders Peirce, he defined nominalism as the devil's philosophy. And there's a lot of wisdom behind that definition, because if people are going to be honest with, if they say, well, I'm a nominalist, which I've run into in Twitter spaces, then that has important implications, one of which is doing away with science. Often the nominalists that I come across, they love science, but I try to remind them that, okay, if you consider yourself a nominalist and you're going to be honest, then you're going to have to do away with science, which is what you love. So that would be if there was a school, that would be it. Nominalists are my enemy.
If I could expand a bit on that more, Nokoo, especially for the audience who aren't familiar with nominalism, could you briefly explain what is a nominalist and what they believe in? Like, what are some core tenets they hold to?
Yeah, well, there seems to be two schools of thought related to this. One would be you would hear about ideas or universals, and they'll say that the nominalist believes that universals don't exist. So, for example, what does that mean? When somebody talks about goodness, or they talk about justice, you talk about someone who's being persecuted for speaking the truth. There seems to be weight behind that. You're willing to suffer for the sake of, in this case, truth. But the nominalist is going to come along and say, truth is not real. Truth is just a name. Nominal It comes from the Latin for name. So by saying that justice is not real, it's a name, what they seem to be doing is denying its very existence. And so it seems to be instead of talking about suffering for the sake of truth, there is no truth. And that's very significant if we're going to be honest with ourselves, because a philosopher from ancient days, his name is Gorgias. He said the following, which is very short and simple, which is why I share it. Gorgias said, nothing is, and even if something were, it couldn't be known. And even if it could be known, it couldn't be communicated. And he was one of the greatest nihilists of all time. But yeah, if you're going to have people that say that justice is not real, it's just a name, you're pretty much saying that justice doesn't exist. Or if it does exist, it's up to us, right? So everyone has their own justice. But then there's no justice. So yeah, nominalism and nihilism seem to be related to each other, and it's exactly what the devil would want us to espouse, and many people sadly do. But the good news is that a lot of people don't practice it. They might be nominalist in a way, but they don't practice it. And then so there's the nominalism in terms of universals, but then this is a little bit more controversial. There's nominalism in terms of relations. This is a complex topic to get into, but why are relations important? Because the example I often give to people is one of my favorite people of all time. His name was Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter. And I love watching his videos. Rest in peace, Steve Irwin. But you watch his videos and he interacts with all kinds of beings, animals, humans. And there's something very wonderful about that. But if we're going to be honest and we're going to say we're going to deny relations, then what does that mean? It means that Steve Irwin cannot relate with other beings. He can't know other beings. He can't befriend other beings. He can't care for other beings because he's not related to them. So there's a lot, and it is a complex subject. But in short, nominalism often concerns universals. Are they real or not? But I would say even deeper than that, it concerns relations. Are they real or not? And so that's what it is.
That reminded me of a quote that I forgot who said this off the top of my head. Correct me if you know who it was. But the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing you he didn't exist at all. And that sounds very much like an homage to nominalism, where if there is no true good or true evil, what's stopping me from simply doing whatever I want? What's stopping me from consequences or repercussions? I could do anything. And that line of thinking could be very dangerous at times, especially if it's put into the hands of wrong people who already have more darker inclinations, which is something that I worry about. But it also sounds similar in the same vein of people who call themselves atheists. A lot of my hot take is I would say majority of people who call themselves atheists aren't actually atheists, they're agnostic. And what I mean by that is that if you actually look into the philosophical claim of atheism, it is an assertion that there is no God. While a lot of times recently, especially in the modernist field, it was almost morphed to be changed in definitional wise to say, oh, I simply lack a belief. I'm not making a claim, I just have no beliefs, which is something where I feel to be very, especially in a philosophical school of thought, disingenuous. And, excuse me for saying it, but a cop-out, really, where if, you know, the original atheists, if you call them that, they'd actually make assert claims, like Epicurus and stuff like that. They're like, here's my claims, come at me. Like, he wouldn't say like, oh, I'm just skeptical, I lack a belief. He'd actually take the bull by the horns and he'd throw down for people who did believe in the concept of God. But one more thing for you, Nokoo, I'm going to bounce back to John, but you mentioned earlier that you struggle with the original question because you see a distinction between schools of thought and ideologues. What is an ideologue, and more importantly, how is that in relations to a modernist? So these concepts of ideologues and modernists, what is that for people who aren't familiar?
Yeah, well, so we go back to, for instance, the ancients, the philosophers. What John mentioned was very wise, where he was talking about Thales, and we say that, for instance, the Greeks were the first philosophers, not because other humans weren't philosophical, but because they asked questions and recognized the being of particular beings in a way that hadn't been done before. And so then we think of Thales as asking the question, what is the arche? What is the principle? What is behind everything? All things are what? And he seemed to respond with water, but you can look and that's skeptical that he meant water. But the main point was looking out at creation and asking questions in a very childlike way about creation. You fast forward a little bit along the tradition and you have what I just mentioned, which is nominalism. If we're going to say that justice is not real, it's just a name, well, who gives it that name? We do. And so now we start to get into a distinction between the ancient philosophers and the moderns, in that the ideologue seems to be different from the philosopher, in the sense that the philosopher is concerned with being, or let's say reality, whereas the ideologue doesn't seem to be. They've kind of, because justice is not real, it's just a name, then I believe in justice. I believe in justice. But that's really what it comes down to, is my beliefs, my ideas. So the philosopher is concerned with way more. They seem to be concerned with reality, whereas the ideologue seems to be concerned with reason or logic to a fault. And so these are people that are often out of touch with reality. I say that as a former libertarian myself. I was under the impression that I had the right ideas and that I had to shape reality to conform to my ideas, when it seems to be the opposite way, where we ultimately are subject to reality. And if reality disagrees with our hypothesis, then we should discard our hypothesis. So philosophers seem to be concerned with reality, whereas ideologues seem to be concerned with ideas, which are not always real.
All right, thank you, Nokoo. And a question I want to ask John, going to more of our discussion, especially I've been seeing this in Twitter spaces, where, like stated earlier, we come across many different people, many different views and backgrounds. But for you, John, how do you navigate discussions with individuals who may have drastically differing philosophical perspectives? And what value do you see in diverse philosophical viewpoints? So I could say an example would be our friend Tweetathon, shout out to you if you're listening to this, where he is a large fan of Parmenides. And although we could say we disagree in a lot of things, I can't recall a time where I haven't enjoyed a conversation with him. And how would you approach that, really?
Yeah, I think for the Tweetathon question, like Nokoo can answer that, because he's engaged with Tweetathon in very many occasions, and very respectfully they towards one another there. It's always going to be that people are just going to have a difference of opinion in some ways, and the best thing that you can do is just try to listen to what they believe, and you can try to engage with why this is reasonable to hold, and you can do that. Mostly what me and Nokoo try to figure out is like what are the things that we actually agree on, and how can we move from there on, and all. And because there's always going to be something that we can at least agree on, otherwise we wouldn't be even speaking the same language, or none of us would be able to communicate anything at all, despite the differences in like languages and all. There has to be at least one truth that we all share in order to be able to make this even possible. Otherwise you're just going to be basically a nihilist, if anything, in regards to that. Well, Sola, you and I are talking right now, but ultimately our words are meaningless because we don't have that, we don't have anything to really ground them on, like, because we come from different like subjective positions and all that. Everything that we are communicating is, if we understand it is by accident, not necessarily because these words in themselves are giving us something with respect to reality itself. So there has to be. So I always take that as something of you can say a sobering truth. But yeah, it's one of those things I always come back to, in the sense like I know that there has to be something that we that there is a truth that we are all capable of like knowing. Because then nothing would even matter. This discussion, you and I talking right now, no matter what, it just wouldn't matter at all, and all that. We would just be going through the motions, really. So, like, yeah, that's something I would say on that.
Yeah, and saying that reminds me of a quote by St. Thomas Aquinas when he was asked why he cites Aristotle heavily, which, as we know, he was a pagan, and St. Thomas Aquinas was a Catholic, and he would respond saying that all truth is God's truth. And to me, I find that very fascinating how I see him as being ahead of his time, saying even though they weren't, Catholic, you can't argue with, their logic or, for some points he made. And that's something I found very beautiful in the field of philosophy, definitely. But going over to Nokoo, do you want to expand a little bit on John's point?
Yeah. Well, we host spaces and we come across we come across different kinds of people. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when people speak in the following way. They say, well, you have your worldview and I have mine. And the reason why I'm bothered by that is because if we're going to be honest, philosophically speaking, then all there is worldviews, then there's no point in partaking in dialogue, because a worldview seems to be very relative to the person. You're already unknowingly promoting the philosophy of relativism. And again, if we're just going to be honest, then why even partake in dialogue, which seems to be concerned with the truth in itself and not just what we think the truth is. So the one thing, and why common sense is so important, is because in order to avoid agreeing on relativism, there has to be truths which can be recognized by people, in the sense that these truths are real. They don't depend on us. They don't depend on our opinion. And we come to recognize these beings in a mutual way. And so if we can agree on the being of other beings, then we have a common ground for speaking about being, for partaking in a dialogue. So what I try to remind people who are so used to relativism is that it is a philosophy, and it's a false philosophy. And if we are going to be philosophical, we have to go further than just, you have your worldview, I have mine. And so how do I do that? Well, a lot of that is grounded in common sense, which concern the first principles, the first truths. And if I can get someone who might not even be Catholic, it's not even a matter of faith at this point, it's just they think in a different way. My goal is to get them to recognize the first truths, because if I can get them there, I have already helped them to overcome relativism, which, again, if we're going to be honest philosophically, we might as well just not even partake in dialogue, because it is no dialogue. It seems to be two people that are giving a monologue, right? So I have my system and you have your system, and I'm going to tell you about it. But that's not dialogue. That's more two people giving monologues to each other.
And you've mentioned a couple times now first truth. And my question is, when you say first truth, that implies there's more than one truth. Would it? As in there's a first truth, a second truth? Or how would that go about, that terminology? And second, how is that in comparison with the logos, which I always assumed the logos to be the one truth, as in the reason why we engage in dialogue and we discuss these complex conversations? What would you like to say upon that?
Yes. So when it comes to the first truths, we're talking about principles. What is a principle? This gets us back to the very beginning of philosophy with asking the question, what is an arche? An arche is a principle. So when we're talking about the first truths, we're talking about what are the first beings that I wouldn't say that we can recognize, but the first beings from which we proceed. Where do we begin? Where's the origin? Where's the arche? And so in this case, there are multiple of these beings, multiple principles, and they're related to each other. So one of them is the principle of identity. which recognizes that beings are beings. The cup that's right in front of me is a cup. In having that commonsensical recognition, the cup is not some part of some kind of simulation. It could be gone at any moment. It might not even be there. It's just something that I have in my head. No, it's there. And so that would be one of the first truths, is the principle of identity. Related to that would be the principle of non-contradiction. So when speaking with people, we often say a lot of things, but this principle helps us to discard the lies and make room for the truth. In that, what is it about? Well, the principle of non-contradiction says that something cannot both be and not be at the same time in the same way. So if I'm speaking with somebody and they say something like, well, life is hard, but it's also not hard. Okay, I mean, there is some wisdom in there. But if they take it to mean, or just something more simple, they'll say like, hey, I have a car and it's red, but it's not red at the same time in the same way. Or I can imagine anything. I can imagine a human being that is both tall and short at the same time, someone who is free but they're enslaved, or someone who's good and they're evil at the same time. This kind of stuff. I'd point to it and I'd say, no, you can't do that. You can't both be red and not red at the same time and in the same way. Either you're red or you're not red. So it helps to, again, like I said, make way for truth, right? And so we can recognize when people are speaking the truth. We can recognize when they've contradicted themselves. They've spoken in a false way, and contradictions would get in the way of dialogue. So yeah, you start from these places, and then you end up at conclusions. And that seems to be proper philosophy proper. So and these principles, again, they don't depend on us. In the sense that if I thought to myself, well, A is not A, who cares? Who cares? It doesn't depend on you. And so we begin with the beings that are independent of us, which and then we go from there together, both seeking truth. And also just the last one, I'll just mention it because most people don't. It's the principle of the excluded middle. And then even more important, which John could get into better than I, it's the PSR. And this is a very significant principle because what it says is that there's a reason for being for everything. So if somebody asks the question, well, this occurred, why did it occur? That is a very good question. Because why? Because there's a reason. There's a reason behind everything. And that's important because we, like children, we ask these questions, why and how and who and what and where. And there are answers. There are answers. And so you have the PSR, the principle of identity, the principle of non-contradiction, the principle of the excluded middle. And these are all where we begin philosophy. And that's why they're important.
All right, thank you. And that was actually the next question. You caught me pretty good. I was going to ask John, because I know he has hosted numerous spaces talking and discussing the PSR, principle of sufficient reason. John, would you like to elaborate on that more or explain it to a layman who's never heard of it before? Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, well, there are different formulations of the PSR, and you'll find them in different for different peoples. Not all are from the same schools. You find, for example, one of the first formulations of it that was put forward was by Leibniz, and I think it was in the monadology. But you also will find Spinoza affirming it, and among others. Although for Leibniz, he does point out that he is not the first person to come up with it. This is a principle that goes back to the ancients, even though they don't write down here's my principles, sufficient reason, but they speak but how they speak about things is with respect to understanding that there is reasons or sufficient reasons behind whatever it is that they are investigating. And so just trying to recall, because me and Nokoo, we were reading from Saint Thomas Aquinas and the Principle of Sufficient Reason by Dr. Andrew Sullivan. He presented three general formulations of the Principle of Sufficient Reason, which he titled the weak, the mild, and the strong Principle of Sufficient Reason. The reason why he gave these titles to each of them is due to the scope that they sort of encompass in a way. So he would say that like the weakest has a much more limited scope than the strong one, insofar as like it's not as though it only focuses on one thing or so. It's just more that like it's going on it's going on types of reasons. So he presented the weak as that which from nothing comes, which is a principle of in respect to cause or causality. And he presented the mild that I'm trying to recall. I had to look this up again right now, but at the second one I think had to do with contingency. I don't remember the exact. I'm just kind of looking at, just scrolling through, because I did wrote down a blog post on a chapter of that book that sort of it goes on to explaining the principle itself, and so the mild PSR is like whatever exists contingently has a cause for its existence. And then the one that we focus on is on the strong PSR, the one that me and Nokoo focus on. So that would be that whatever exists has a reason for its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in the causal efficacy of some other being. Another way to say that is that whatever exists has a reason for its existence from itself or from another. And the reason why this is, titled the strong principle of sufficient reason as opposed to the others, which has to do with like a cause in regards to becoming, or a cause in regards to contingent being. The strong principle of sufficient reason applies to all being, or all that is. That's why it's it's in regards to all that is, not just simply those things that are of becoming, or those things that exist contingently. It will encompass those two principles within it in a way. So the strong principle of sufficient reason, that whatever exists has a reason for its existence, either in itself or from another. This is as I said, it's something I always say that in many ways a lot of people hold this implicitly to as they are doing whatever it is. If you hear something, there has to be a reason for that sound that sort of came about, at least sort of spontaneously. Why like that? We always kind of looking into reasons for why something happens, whatever it is that we observe and all. And so yeah, so if anybody wants a good source on this, would be that same book that I just mentioned. It's titled St. Thomas Aquinas and the Principle of Sufficient Reason by Dr. Andrew Sullivan, who he is now on Twitter, interestingly, mostly focused on on apologetics as he is. He does especially good content on he did good content on YouTube and all.
Maybe I could get him on my podcast sometime. Who knows?
Yeah, no, you can do it. You can also you can also maybe either DM him or just reply or tweet at him. He'll most likely respond.
Okay, sounds good. And in regards to St. Thomas Aquinas, I know I really didn't have you guys originally on the episode for him. I want to talk more classical philosophy, but of course he's going to be brought up in conversation. But can you explain the influential impact he had on not only Catholicism, but medieval philosophy? Nokoo, you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, one way of answering this question is leaning on history. So, for instance, in about the 19th or 20th century, about late 19th, early 20th, the Catholic Church was trying to respond to modernity. Or what is that? It is this age that we live in right now. You had, for instance, the scientific revolution, and and that's been very important in the lives of people. A lot of it is based on reason. And so the church tried to respond to the modern age. And when the church was looking at her tradition, which is 2,000 years old, the Pope at the time, I believe Pope Leo XIII, he selected St. Thomas in particular as someone who's very important for helping us to respond to science and scientists and the time that we live in. And so he was given the title of the common doctor. And a lot of that is because when you read St. Thomas, you come across a lot of wisdom in one place. So he is in dialogue with many wise men. He cites or he quotes, for example, Plato. He quotes Aristotle. He quotes Saint Augustine, who's a very important Catholic, and also Christians from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. So Saint John of Damascus, who's also a very big deal, but he also learned from Jews, one of which was Maimonides, who's been given the nickname the Second Moses because he's that important for the Jewish people and the Jewish tradition. But then also Muslims like Averroes and Al-Ghazali. So and then Pseudo Dionysius, who was there's been a lot of scientific discovery regarding that person in particular, which is fascinating. But in St. Thomas, you have a solid enough ground upon which to build. And so he's given the title of the common doctor because a lot of Catholics can agree with the truths that St. Thomas discovered. That doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but it is some kind of solid foundation that you find in him. So that was one of the reasons why the Pope selected him above others as the person that we ought to learn from as Catholics in our attempt to respond to the scientific revolution and a lot of the things that have occurred lately.
All right, thank you. And that was all my questions for now, but I have a bit of a surprise for you that I didn't share with either of you before getting on. I have some Q&A from some audience members who are, let's say, fans of your guys' work. So my first question I have is to John. It says, John, a big fan of a lot of stuff you do on your Twitter spaces. You have inspired me directly to get back to the Catholic faith. I am going through RCIA soon. I want to thank you for that personally. I would not have done that without you. My question for you is, I want to get into classical philosophy more. Is there a book that you would recommend I read first to get into it as an introduction?
Oh, wow. That's, I'm very glad to hear someone that's been inspired also to go to RCIA. Honestly, that... No, so if there's any like texts that to get them into philosophy, is that will be the general question?
Getting into classical philosophy specifically.
Well,
be a beginner, like first, like dipping your toes into it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just repeat what Athenian always says to us, which is that just go to the primary sources. Don't necessarily just read someone just doing secondary commentary or commentary on like Plato or Aristotle. Just go read Plato or Aristotle. Go read Heraclitus. Go read Parmenides. Go read those, or if you can find them around. They are accessible. I haven't read all of them myself. I've read the dialogues here and there. Some of the dialogues I've read. Some Aristotelian works here and there. And Parmenides is mostly, since it's fragments, I just read like parts of the fragments and all. So go to the primary sources, but if you want a text that can ease you into this, the one that I recommend a lot is The History of Philosophy by Frederick Copleston, Jesuit priest that I already mentioned, because he has volumes and works and that goes back from like the ancients to like contemporary existentialists of the 20th century. He invests a lot of time, not just giving you like an account of like, well, there was this thinker, there was this other thinker, and that that's it. He presents a continuity in each of these people, in each of these like schools that come about. He's not going to just simply give you an encyclopedia or just something about like, well, this is like, how philosophy came to be and all that. He's going to present to you these all these schools, their relevance to to the discussion, and how that moved forward. Things continued on. Those things that were discussed were continued on afterwards with these people. So yeah, the volume 1 of the history of philosophy would be a good source in getting into that. Another book that is the one that I read with, at least the first chapter I read it with Nokoo, would be Thinking Being, an introduction to metaphysics in the classical tradition by Eric Pearl. That one is more narrowed down. It's not a history of philosophy, but it goes into reconstructing the understanding of metaphysics since the time of Parmenides, and how that continued on with Plato and Aristotle, Plotinus, and eventually Aquinas. And it is one that did change the way that I view Platonism originally. And it kind of more just shows that it's not simply how people say, just like Plato believed in this doctrine of forms, where he believed that there's a world of form and that's it and all that. Actually, Pearl will go on to give a very a different view of Platonism with respect to the doctrine of forms, but he's going to go further on to explain the sort of that reconstruct how metaphysics was for the ancients and all. If I recall correctly, I think he's a phenomenologist. So it's not a very difficult text. The reason why I recommend these, because these texts are not difficult, especially for the layman around too. So History of Philosophy, Volume 1. And it's also too like Volume 2. Volume 2 gets into medieval philosophy, and you'll find a lot of like the patristics, and then you get into people like Augustine, Aquinas, Bonaventure, others, and to so like and also Thinking Being by Eric Pearl. Yeah, those are two texts I would recommend, at least, to kind of like ease you in that.
All right, thank you so much, John. And we got another question for Nokoo now. Nokoo, I want to express my deepest gratitude to you, your wisdom, dedication, and unwavering strength and spirit to guiding and protecting the Holy Church. I want to thank you for every time you're in a Twitter space where everyone's disagreeing with you and you're still correcting people on not using the word worldview. You are a strong source of strength to me, and I envy you in your journey of Catholicism, and I wish to be like you one day. My question for you is, who are some people in your sphere that you look up to a lot and admire, and wish that you could be like them as yourself?
Thank you very much. It's humbling to hear that. That's my goal in trying to inspire others. That's the metric that I go off of. If I can inspire somebody, then I'm doing something right. So thank you very much. When it comes to influential people or in my sphere, I would point to wonderful people that I've been blessed with being able to befriend. It all began with a mutual that I have on Twitter. His name is Thomistic Disputations. He's taken a break recently from social media, but prior to that break, he began a group chat, and John and I were members of that along with him. And he would go around answering questions, a lot of the times to atheists. He would kind of bait them with tweets, and they would engage with his tweets, and he would respond to them. And so he created this group chat, and over time, by the grace of God, it has grown, this group chat in particular. And I would point to the members of that, one of which is Sola, which is the host of this conversation right now. I'm in awe by his prudence and his wisdom at such a young age. and I feel a sense of responsibility to kind of help him as a young man, and try, if he has any questions, trying to answer them. And yeah, I would point to the members of that particular group chat as being very important. Among which are we have Dr. Kemple. He has Dr. Kemple is doing a lot of great work. He has his own university, online university, and he's going to be starting in January. There's going to be a lot to learn from him for a very affordable price. I suggest whoever's listening to this, whether live or as a playback, look up the Lyceum Institute. Dr. Kemple is a wonderful person, and he's doing a lot of good work. And so that'd be one. Another one would be Athenian Stranger, which John just mentioned. He's been a blessing. Such a wise man. He set such a positive example for all of us in that particular group chat. And he's always, funny man, and can't say enough great things about him. And then other people. Robinson is also another person there who I enjoy learning from, and Damien, who is an Australian Thomist, who's I've done a few spaces with, and he's doing great things. He was in Rome recently, and John Boyer. He's a professor, a Catholic professor. This man is so wise, and he's a father, and he's a husband, and in many ways he is the pinnacle that we all aspire to. And John here, John has been, he's encouraged me to read Plato, for example. That was a recent accomplishment. For the longest time I didn't want to, but he insisted, and I'm grateful to him for having done that. And just to relate to like the prior question to this, if anyone wants to get into philosophy, read Plato's The Gorgias. That's what we've been doing, and it's helped us a lot. And so yeah, the people in that group chat, and then also the people I come across in spaces, some of which are Muslims, some of which are Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, some of which are atheists. They kind of and I often disagree with them, but I can conversate with them. And all these wonderful people have just been a blessing, and one that I'm not worthy of having received, but I try to be thankful for.
All right, thank you. And we should be wrapping up our podcast soon, but I have one more question, and this one is from yours truly, personally, that I have for both of you. You guys always mesh well together, and like I said, being in a podcast, I can't thank you enough for what both of you do, and I'm saying this out of most sincerity in my heart, but you guys mean a lot, and you affect a lot of people. Sorry, in a very good way, and thank you for that, because it helps. And with my last question, when are you guys going to do a podcast together and make your own? Because I know there's a lot of requests for people asking, and I would love to hear eventually you two go on in for up to 2 hours an episode just reading the classics or going into details on questions. And I know for now you're saying you're sticking on Twitter, but would you at least entertain the possibility in the future, or the idea of, maybe we could do something? I don't know, just what are your thoughts on that?
Well, this, what we're doing right now is kind of like you could say the proto episode for a podcast. But we already mentioned that we eventually do want to record something, through his Twitter space, when we actually finish up a text and be able to round up whatever it is that we kind of we come across with, and that will take time. So the one that we want to do is on the Gorgias, which we're still reading. We're still at close to the beginning of that text. So hopefully, we be able to be done. Maybe it's going to be really after the holidays. It might take us maybe more than a month to get through it. But that's why I set it up for a scheduled time. Once a week we meet up on a Twitter space to read it through. and again, what we also like to do is just extend this to other people too. Like, it's not, that's why we don't record it yet, because although there's a lot to be said and all that, but we also like to like invite other people to kind of listen in and like get invested, also look into it too, and maybe just kind of, if they have something that comes in, they can speak about it, maybe just contribute to the conversation. So eventually, once we're done with the entirety text, we hopefully be able to round up. That's why I told Nokoo, just take your notes, because I'm not gonna write anything now for the moment myself. So I told Nokoo to do the legwork of taking the notes, and then eventually we record a space on the Gorgias, and hopefully we also like try to do it with someone who is a bit much more familiarized with this. So like I did have in mind like Athenian Stranger to talk more about, since he always helps us out when it comes to reading these things, helps us out if we have a question about it, clarify it too. That's what we hope for it.
All right, that's all from me. Nokoo, John, do you have any closing remarks or last words you want to say before we close up shop? Nokoo, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I want to say thank you to Sola for considering me worthy, John and I worthy. You have very fascinating guests, and you speak to all kinds of people. So to be selected for this has been an honor, and I would like to thank you, and also John for also just. Like I said before, with the encouragement, I very much follow your lead. So when you have a particular work that you want to learn from, I try to be there and help you in any way I can. So, and also most importantly, thank God for another day, and for blessing us with life to be able to do this.
Yeah,
all right,
and I would say, just read your Plato, please.
Read Plato, sounds good. Well, tune in next episode to have Robinson on, a guest covering what happened to the academia and college universities. That should be a fun episode. And one last time, thank you both, John and Nokoo, for attending. You could find them Fridays on Twitter Spaces. And one more time, could you guys repeat your ats?
Yeah, mine is John XI35. The XI is supposed to be 11.
Okay, Nokoo?
Yeah, I'm Nokoo TV, Nokoo TV on Twitter.
All right, thank you very much. This has been another episode of Requiem Radio. I'll see you until next time.